I also want to thank the Tuckahoe Library directors and the staff over there just for facilitating this and allowing me to bring this information to their patrons, because I think this is something that is pertinent, is helpful, and certainly within the age of COVID, it's generally been those with chronic issues, chronic illnesses, such as diabetes, that have been the most impacted groups. So you have the elderly, you have those with chronic illnesses who have been the most susceptible groups to COVID. So I think this is a timely presentation. I think it's relevant. I also think it's pertinent to everything that we are going through right now. So I do want to thank the Tuckahoe Library staff for facilitating this, and certainly all of you for taking your time, taking the time out of your busy days and your busy lives to join me. So I certainly hope and pray that this will be worth it. So just a little bit about me. My name is Dr. Cedrick Batchateu, as was introduced. I'm a pharmacist, public speaker, as well as a wellness advocate. And my mission, one of the reasons I started this whole Cedrick Wellness Resources and bringing natural health and nutrition and prevention to different venues and organizations and libraries is because I really do want to promote better health. But I believe that better health will come with a better understanding of what's happening in our bodies, and ultimately the relationship between the choices we make, whether it's in terms of food we eat, to the circumstances we find ourselves in, how those factors play a key role in our immediate health. So my journey began even prior to me attending and graduating pharmacy school, but I did attend Albany College of Pharmacy. I graduated with the class of 2013 with my doctorate of pharmacy. And one of the first things that I did was I went back home to my hometown of Rochester, New York. I don't know if anybody's ever been there, but it's northwestern New York. And I was worshiping with the church there, the North Greece Road Church of Christ. And so I decided that I would do something for the members. I would put together a seminar addressing one of the more common topics that many of the members of that particular congregation of the Churches of Christ was struggling with. And it was very well received. And word got out fast. It wasn't long before other churches were calling and asking me to come and speak at their congregations. And ultimately it spilled over into other organizations. So I've been doing this happily for about 6 years now, 7 years now. No, ultimately 6 years, because I started in 2014. And so my style of teaching is taking medical information and scientific facts, and then breaking it down in a way that is understandable for the average person. So no scientific jargon, no overthinking, but I combine the scientific information with nutrition. So as you follow along, I think you're going to notice that there is a trend and an emphasis on some of the things that we have the power to do, the choices that we have the ability to make. And so right now I have about 14 different topics in all. Many of them are related to one another, such as this one. Diabetes relates to another topic called less sugar, better health. They go in sync. So a lot of the information complements each other. But ultimately I have 14 different topics, and with Tuckahoe, my hope is that they'll have me come back, and certainly many of you will find this useful enough to request that I come back, and we'll be able to enlighten everyone. But my personal website is drced.com. I picked Dr. Ced for several reasons. Number one, it's 5 letters. And number two, it's short. Cedrick, the way my name is spelled, throughout my life, everybody either spelled it with a C or a K. Unfortunately for them, my parents spell it with both. So Cedrick proved to be a little bit confusing all throughout my life. But that's just a little brief history about me. Let's get right into this. Now, before I actually start, I do want to say, if anybody has any questions or would like to clarify something, please type it into the chat or save it for the end, because I really don't want anyone to forget their questions. I want to make sure that I give attention and time and careful thought to whatever's asked of me. And that can only happen if I save it all until the end, because I don't want to have to keep stopping. I think for everyone's convenience, I think it may be easiest if I just went throughout the seminar and then towards the end, we address all questions. Now, this isn't a very long presentation, so I will make time, I believe 30 minutes set aside for any and all questions that you may have. So thank you for your patience, and let's begin. By the way, I have a mug here. It's water and a little bit of lemon, so in case my throat gets dry. So let's begin. So the outline of this presentation is to give you an understanding of diabetes. We're going to take a look at the overall picture of what diabetes is, what the picture looks like within this country of these United States. And certainly then we're going to get into the cellular level with what is happening within our bodies, within our bloodstream. I want us to differentiate the differences between type 1 and type 2. We're also going to look at gestational diabetes, which is often unbeknown to a lot of people, is a third category of diabetes. And then we're going to look at some of the different things that can be done to test, to diagnose. And ultimately, we're going to look at what you can do in a section called nutrition. So we're going to look at some common stereotypes and misconceptions about diabetes, and ultimately what you have the power to do for yourself and your loved ones. So just to give you a brief history, the actual medical name for diabetes is diabetes mellitus. And what that means is to pass through. Something passes through and it's sweet, alluding to the sugar that is found in the bloodstream, or rather in the urine of a person with a high blood sugar level. It spans all the way back to 1889 when Joseph von Meren, he found a link between what was unbeknown to many of them, but what is now known as diabetes and the pancreas. And so he found this link by removing the pancreas from dogs. And he noticed that, they began to display the symptoms of diabetes. So they were very thirsty. Once the pancreas was removed, they would lose weight. And when they would urinate, the urine would attract a lot of flies. You see, the flies are attracted to the sugar. And so this was followed up in 1910 by Sir Schaefer. Through research, he found that the lack of a hormone called insulin was really the cause of diabetes in humans. And then again in 1921, Sir Frederick Grant and Charles Herbert Best, they realized that they could actually reverse diabetes in those who were diabetics by giving them extracts of the pancreas. See, the pancreas is what's responsible for making diabetes, so for making insulin. So they realized if we gave extracts of the pancreas to those who were diabetic, it regulated or balanced their blood sugar. And so what they did, which was world changing, was they made the patent to their discovery freely available. And so it's free of charge for all diabetics. And what that does, and what that did, was it allowed other countries and other companies to pursue different ways of developing insulin and delivering it to those who are diabetic. And so we find ourselves today with many different types of diabetes medications, many different types of insulin available on the market. And ultimately, in 1936, Sir Harold Percival Hemsworth, I happen to like that name, was able to make the distinction between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Now, of course, we're going to get into this a little later. And this is where we find ourselves today. Now, here's a map of the continental United States. And what we find within this map is very interesting. Today in America, about 11% of all all Americans consider themselves diabetic. That translates to about 34.2 million people. What's interesting is that 88 million people are at a great risk or an elevated risk of becoming diabetes. See, we call this category pre-diabetes. Ultimately, what it means is if they continue living the way that they are living, eating the way that they are eating, they will more than likely become diabetic. Okay, so in order to prevent this, we need to focus on things such as this: seminars, educating people. We've got to focus on exercise programs. We've got to focus on nutritional education, ultimately changing certain habits, because these 88 million people added on top of the 34 current diabetics will yield about a third of the United States becoming diabetic. Currently, diabetes is the sixth leading cause of death within the United States, being responsible for almost 80,000 lives, 79,535 to be more specific. And what we're looking at, if things continue the way they are, we are looking at 1 in 3 American citizens becoming or developing diabetes. Now, the map actually paints a very interesting picture. In order to identify the colors, just understand, please understand that blue has a low prevalence of diabetes. So ideally, you want to be in a blue state. Gray is next with a below average prevalence. Orange is above average, and then dark red or dark brown has a high prevalence of diabetes, about 7 to about 9.5%. Now, for our sake, we live in New York, so let's focus on New York for a little bit. New York is currently below average of diabetes in diabetes prevalence. So good job, guys. Everyone, pat yourselves on the back. All right. Let's not become like Georgia or South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Tennessee. I could go on. But as you can see, generally it's these southern states, or as they call it, the Bible Belt, that are dealing with an above average to high prevalence of diabetes. Now, I've done this seminar several times and with different, over at different venues and, just with different groups and people. And I always, get a kick out of some of the answers that I get. I've asked people, quite frankly, when I was doing these seminars in person, I tend to make it very interactive. But and I'm going to go ahead and ask you all this at the end, just for the sake of time. But I've asked people in the past, what are some of your reasons, your beliefs, or your theories for why these particular states seem to have the greatest prevalence in diabetes? Now, what's interesting is I also have a seminar on high blood pressure, and I also have a seminar on obesity. And believe it or not, the maps, especially high blood pressure map in the United States, mirrors this one. They're very similar, okay? And so it's the same states that are the same culprits. And so what's interesting are some of the answers. I've had people, especially when I've been in religious circles and, churches and religious organizations, and I've done this, and I've had people tell me, a lot of people are from the South, and, they tell me about some of the foods that they eat over there, how not a lot of people walk, people drive everywhere, the weather's good, so people are always out and about, but unfortunately, there's not a lot of walking or jogging, or at least according to them. I don't want to indict anybody who's from Georgia or South Carolina and turn them against me. I certainly don't want to do that. But these are just some of the reasons that I've been given. I've never been to many of those states, but these are some of the reasons that I've been given as to why these rates tend to be of greater prevalence down there. Others have mentioned the food, their sweet tea is really sweet, apparently. And the food is delicious. but so a lot of it has to do with, as I understand, the diet culture, the food culture, as well as just the social culture, the idea of driving everywhere, or these gatherings just being full of food, and the way it's cooked, and everything. So these are just some of the answers that I've been giving, but I'd be interested to know what your thoughts are at the end of this. But to further elaborate this, I wanted to get an idea of what diabetes looks like when we look at Americans by age, when we look at Americans by gender, and when we look at America by racial and ethnic groups. Now, these statistics may have changed somewhat because, every year they change somewhat, but generally the trends remain the same. So within the age groups, let's say 60 and over, let's consider them elderly, and then 59 and under, let's consider them young ones. So if you're 59, you're very young in this particular example. But the prevalence of diabetes is much greater in those 60 and over than those under 60. Now, when we look at males and females, men and women, we find that the prevalence of diabetes is slightly higher at about 13.6% within males than the 11.7% in females. And ultimately, when we break down prevalence within the different racial and ethnic groups, breaking them down into white Americans, Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, and others. Well, for the sake of classifications, others could be Asian Americans. Okay, we find that the prevalence is greatest in Black Americans, which is then followed by Hispanic Americans, followed by white Americans, and last and certainly least, Asian Americans. So whatever they're doing seems to be working at keeping diabetes at bay. And I'd love to get your inputs as to what some of the reasons you think may be causing these varying results or varying statistics within the different ethnic groups, the different genders, and certainly the different age groups. So if anybody has any ideas, please write them down or jot them down for us to share. So let's take a look at what actually happens in the human body when we discuss diabetes. What we're talking about in diabetes centers around the blood or the bloodstream, what's happening inside the blood. Just to give you a quick illustration, when you eat food of any kind, you're usually obtaining something called carbs, okay? Just for your sake, carbs are probably the most prevalent source of energy for us today as Americans. Carbs are everywhere. Just to give you an idea, carbs are cookies, carbs are cakes, carbs are breads, carbs are foods like pasta and rice. Carbs are everywhere. And they tend to be cheap for that matter. And so when you and I eat a hamburger, for example, please don't take offense if you're a vegetarian. I certainly just wanted to take something that was stereotypically American. So there's nothing more American than the Big Mac or the Quarter Pounder. I really don't know what that is. But ultimately, if you were to eat food, within that food, you obtain macronutrients and micronutrients. But in this case, I want us to focus on carbs. Carbohydrates are simple molecules of sugar or glucose. And that glucose is just the scientific term for sugar. And you can think about it much like a phone that we all carry. See, the cell that receives the sugar is the phone. The sugar is the electricity or the electric energy that is responsible for powering up our phones. Now, insulin is a hormone within the body that takes the sugar that we've just digested, we've just consumed and digested, and places that sugar inside of the cell. So I want you to think of insulin like the charger. See, the charger plugs to the wall, and takes the electrical current and delivers that current directly into your phone, thus giving your phone energy. And so that's very much what insulin does. Insulin is the hormone that takes sugar from your bloodstream, from the foods that you've eaten, and takes that sugar and puts it inside of your cells. And what that does is it gives the cells energy. Now, of course, too much unused energy will become stored as fat or excess body weight. Okay, and the pancreas is that hormone, the pancreas is that organ within the body that is responsible for the production of insulin. So again, use my cell phone analogy, if you like, to help you better understand what's happening. So in the cell phone analogy, the pancreas is the manufacturer of the charger. The insulin is the charger itself. The cell phone is the cell. Okay, and the sugar or the glucose is the electrical current. Excuse me. Just to give you another illustration of this, you can think of your bloodstream or what's happening inside of your body, your veins, your arteries. You can think of them a little bit like the highway. Within the highway, when you get on the 9A, for example, you see all types of vehicles. You're going to see fire trucks, you're going to see police vehicles, you're going to see motorcycles, and you're going to see a regular vehicle. Okay, now that's much of what we find within our blood vessels or within our bloodstreams. You're going to see all types of cells. You're going to see white blood cells, red blood cells. You're going to see macrophages. You're going to see bacteria, viruses flowing through, much like a highway. Now, what is happening in the disease known as diabetes, or the dysfunction known as diabetes, is that when you and I consume food, that sugar enters our bloodstream. Unfortunately, the sugar causes some sort of a jam up or traffic jam. Okay, and so sugar does not belong in the blood. And so we have an organ called the pancreas that is responsible for producing insulin. And what the insulin does is it takes the sugar from the bloodstream and puts the sugar inside of our cells. So essentially, imagine having a traffic jam and having the police coming along and directing and breaking up what's causing the jam and allowing traffic to resume. The pancreas is what makes the insulin. Just another illustration, because this is, if there's anything I want you to take away from this, it is probably this concept. When you and I eat food, the food gets broken down through mechanical, which is chewing, and chemical digestion, which is the hydrochloric acid within our stomach. Now, part of that breakdown is to release what is found within the food. And what we're talking about is types of sugars, glucose. So we're talking about sugar. Now, what sugar does when it is in the blood is it slows down the flow of blood. There's the traffic jam illustration that I was alluding to. And so it thickens the blood. And therefore, this thickened blood does not flow properly. And so it begins to affect other areas of your body's ability to function properly. And so we have an organ called the pancreas, and it produces a hormone called insulin. Now, what's interesting is this: the illustration for insulin, it may not be familiar to you. It's a small vial, but anybody who is type 1 diabetic would recognize that vial. You know, it could be Humulin or Humalog, but generally they are vials just like that. And what the insulin does is it takes that sugar and it opens the door inside of the cell, almost like a key, and puts that sugar inside of the cell. So this is perhaps one of the more important things that I want you to take from this presentation. Now, when we look at the different types of diabetes, what we've probably heard, or many of us have heard, or we constantly hear about, we hear about type 2 diabetes, and we even hear about type 1 diabetics. There is a third category of diabetes known as gestational diabetes. However, we will address that a little later, okay? Because gestational revolves certain circumstances. But the idea being is this: most diabetics today that you and I have come across are more than likely type 2 diabetics. Now, judging by the illustration as well as the the elderly couple there, type 2 diabetes is usually found in the adults and the elderly. Now, if we go back just a couple slides, you remember the comparison between those who are 60 and over and those who were 59 and under. We found that those who were 60 and over were more likely or had a higher prevalence of diabetes than those who were under 59 and under. And so type 2 diabetes is often found in those who are adults and elderly. Now, it's defined by little working insulin. So quite clearly, the pancreas is present, but the pancreas is not working optimally. It's only working part-time, if you will. And so this is often treated using nutrition. So changing your diet, maybe adding more vegetables, boosting your nutritional content, and certainly by medicine, medications such as metformin, different oral anti-diabetic medication. So that's how we generally treat type 2 diabetes. And this is how the majority of Americans who are type 2 diabetes, this is the approach that they are currently taking. However, the less popular course and perhaps even more severe form of diabetes is called or classified as type 1. This is generally found in about 5 to 10% of the population of diabetics. It usually affects children, newborn, and teenager, so the youth. And it typically will manifest itself at birth or as a result of some sort of event or occurrence, maybe autoimmune reaction that took place while the fetal child was developing inside of the mother. And so what we're dealing with is within the pancreas, which is the organ that's responsible for insulin, we have these cells called beta cells. Now, the beta cells themselves are the structure that actually produce and release the insulin. So what they find is that in type 1 diabetics, beta cells are damaged. So the child was born with damaged beta cells, or shall we say a damaged pancreas. So the pancreas is never ultimately able to produce the insulin. And so these patients or these children at an early age have to rely on insulin injection. So it goes back to that vial I mentioned earlier. So they are constantly injecting themselves. Fortunately for them, with the advancements in technology and science and healthcare, now we have things such as the Dexcom machines where you just put it on your somewhere on your person and it'll automatically monitor your blood sugar. And some of them can even tell you when to inject insulin. And I believe some of them can even auto-inject. I'm not quite sure about that, but it's made life for diabetics, especially type 1 diabetics, so much simpler and easier. Now, how do doctors or physicians, or how can you yourself identify or understand your risk of diabetes? Well, there are a series of tests that can be done from your doctor's office or even by yourself in your own home. These tests will generally tell you how at risk you are or whether you're a full-blown diabetic. Right? So these tests can classify you as either having normal blood sugar, being within pre-diabetic parameters, or being a diabetic yourself. So the first thing we're talking about is A1C. This is a test that will generally be done when you go to your doctor's office. And what the A1C does is it gives you and your physician a snapshot of your blood sugar, how it's performed over the last 3 to 6 months, 3 months to be more precise. And so the A1C is a reflection of how much blood sugar control your body has. And so the numbers to look for listed here, we have if your A1C is below 5.7%, that's a sign that you are doing well. Your body is able to manage its blood sugar wonderfully. Your pancreas doesn't seem to have any issues removing sugar from the body. It hasn't had these troubles over the last couple of months. If it's between 5.7 to 6.4%, then you are at a greater risk. That's called prediabetes. And certainly, if your A1C is 6.5% and above, then you are diabetic. The next test that you can do, or you can do with your physician, is the fasting blood glucose test. And so this is a test where they'll likely measure the amount of sugar. They'll measure the amount or the responsiveness of your bloodstream to the presence of sugar in the body. So you could say you could eat something and then 8 hours later, test your blood sugar and see whether in that time frame your body has produced adequate insulin to remove the sugar that you've consumed from your bloodstream. And so the numbers to look out here with regarding to fasting blood glucose is you want to have a fasting blood glucose less than 126 milligram per deciliter is what the unit is. And there's something that many people can do for themselves or by themselves. It's the oral glucose tolerance test. And the way it looks is you go to your local CVS or Walmart or even Amazon and you buy one of these sweet sugary substances, a glucose drink, for example, and you would drink that. And then a few hours later, you would simply measure your bloodstream. You know, you would get one of those testing devices, glucose testing devices, and you could effectively measure your blood sugar to see whether in those few 3 to 4 hours, in that time frame, your body has been able to reduce the level of sugar in the blood. Generally, what you're looking for is an oral glucose tolerance test value less than 200 milligram per deciliter, because anything above 200 will indicate that you are likely diabetic. But some symptoms that can really clue you in as to whether you are diabetic or you are at a great risk of diabetes include, for example, increased thirst. And that's primarily because when you have excess sugar in your bloodstream, the bloodstream itself becomes a little thicker. And so what the body will try to do is dilute the blood. And it'll try to get you to drink more water by sending out thirst signals. By diluting the bloodstream, it allows for the body to be able to then get rid of the excess fluid and through urination. Now, within the urination, you're going to find that it tends to be very, very sweet. That leads us to our next hint, which is frequent urination and sweet urination. Now, you can tell because it smells very sweet. Or let's say if you were out in the woods, for example, you would have flies buzzing around, coincidentally, because the flies are drawn to the sugar. Isn't that amazing how flies just somehow instinctively know whenever you have something, like a rotten banana or something, you throw it in the garbage and they're buzzing, 5 minutes later. And so they are able to follow these chemical signals. I don't know all about fly morphology, but I know that they are able to identify where their food is coming from, and certainly, they start buzzing around. But another symptom to look at is fatigue. What we're talking about is not a feeling of being overworked and being tired. We're talking about chronic fatigue, always feeling like you don't have enough energy. Now, this is a sign that is explicitly linked to diabetes, because if you remember, the way the body is supposed to function when it functions properly is that the body itself allows for the insulin allows for the sugar to enter your cells. And that is what powers them up, gives them energy. But in this particular case, if your insulin is not working as well as it should, that ultimately means your cells will not get the energy that they require. Therefore, your body will not have the energy and you will feel tired, you will feel sluggish. And so another symptom of this is unexplained weight loss. Because your pancreas is not producing enough insulin, and the insulin is not taking all the sugar and putting it into your cell, it's almost like you're starving yourself. And so this accounts for the weight loss that takes place. Now, it's not healthy weight loss. It's not fun weight loss. It means your cells ultimately are not able to get the nutrition or the fuel or the energy that they require. Other symptoms, because diabetes deals with the blood and the life of the body itself is within the blood. What we find is that diabetes affects your cardiovascular system. What we're talking about is it puts you at a greater risk of high blood pressure, the medical term for which is called hypertension. And again, sugar in the blood thickens the blood. And so therefore, in order to push that bloodstream all over your body, your heart's going to have to pump faster. It's going to have to pump harder because the blood is thicker. You can imagine water flows with very little resistance. However, honey has a lot of resistance. Okay. Another aspect of your health that is affected is your digestion, and you're constantly you've constantly or frequently find yourself constipated. These are also other symptoms of diabetes. Why? Because again, if your blood flow or if your blood content has excess sugar, the blood becomes thick. It doesn't flow like it should, and it doesn't flow where it should, which brings us to our third point: sexual function, and for many women, urinary tract infection. For sexual function, for example, in order to be sexually aroused, the man and the woman both have to have adequate blood flow flowing to their sexual organs. But again, if the blood flow is impeded or restricted because of its thickness, you're not going to be able to get as excited or as aroused as you normally would. Okay, and so for women, a urinary tract infection, you have excess sugar there, you have bacteria there that are going to ferment and metabolize the sugar and grow, and so it puts you at a greater risk of a UTI. So to conclude with regards to the impact of diabetes within the body, it is crucial to understand that diabetes is a vascular disease, which means the body has a system of connected and interconnected highway known as the vascular system, consisting of capillaries and arteries and veins. You can think of the interstate highway. Okay, it connects you from New York to California. You don't have to drive all over. You can just stay on the highway, and one highway will lead to another, and you'll find yourself on the other side of the country. The body is much the same. What we mean by that is these blood vessels pretty much act like the highway because they are the ones that deliver the nutrients to the various organs and cells in the body. So some organs that I want us to take a look at include our eyes, our kidneys, and our extremities. So let's start with the eyes, retinopathy. So keep in mind, and this is crucial to understanding everything all these complications we're going to address now. Sugar comes from the foods that we eat. The body has a pancreas that releases a hormone known as insulin, and the insulin's job is to remove sugar from the bloodstream and put that sugar into the cells, thus allowing the cells to grow and to have energy to function. That's what happens in a normal body or under normal conditions. Diabetes is a dysfunction of that process whereby the pancreas is not working as well as it should or is not working at all. And therefore, the sugar that has been consumed from the food remains in the blood. And what that does is it thickens the blood. And so that leads to all sorts of problems. The one problem we're going to look at now is the eye or retinopathy. And so when blood flow to your eye nerves and your eyes in themselves, your organs, when blood flow is restricted, the eyes become damaged. So the damaged vessel will reduce the flow, and essentially scarring will occur. And this is one of the most common diabetic complications. And so symptoms of this include floaters and dark spots in your visual periphery, having blurred vision, and being unable to distinguish color. So your sight, your vision itself begins to be impacted negatively. And so how we can prevent this is to address our blood pressure, address our blood sugar, and getting regular eye exams. The next complication I want us to look at has to deal with the kidney. We call this nephropathy. And again, this occurs when blood flow to your kidneys. We have two kidneys on the side of our bodies, and the kidneys are responsible for filtering the body and filtering the blood. So when blood flow to the kidneys is restricted, the kidneys essentially starve or they thirst. And so they began to be damaged. And so the toxic that they were supposed to remove from the bloodstream will tend to remain in the bloodstream. And so ultimately culminating in further damage to the kidneys and further damage to other organs within your body. And so 40% of kidney failures today are caused by uncontrolled diabetes. And so symptoms of nephropathy include fatigue, nausea, or vomiting, again, because the kidneys are supposed to filter your blood and remove a whole lot of waste. But because they're not doing that, the nausea or vomiting will be a symptom of the toxic or the toxins in your body, and swelling of our arms and legs. So how do we prevent this? Well, by monitoring how much sodium we consume, how much protein, potassium, and phosphorus, by losing weight. And for those who are, who have a renal function that is extremely low, or kidneys that have failed, their last line or their final option is to be dialyzed. And the picture illustrates what happens in the dialysis process, which is you have a person who goes into a clinic such as the Vita, and they sit down, and ultimately a machine is responsible for doing the work of the kidneys that have now failed. And so what that does is it takes blood from your body, puts it through this machine with a dialyzer, with a cleaning agent, and it removes some of the excess waste in the blood, and it puts it right back inside of your body. And so this is a quick summary of what dialysis is. I'm sure it's many times more complex than I've just explained, but that was just to give you an idea. And a third symptom of or a third complication of uncontrolled diabetes is called neuropathy. Now, neuropathy has to deal with your nerves or your nerve endings. So what we're talking about is our extremities. What we're talking about when we mention our extremities, we're talking about our hands and our feet, our toes, because they are some of the farthest things from our heart. And so what that means is when your blood sugar is high or your blood is thick, it's not able to flow properly. And what that does is it means that your hands, your feet, your extremities will not get the blood flow that they so require. And so what this can result in is a loss in sensitivity. You don't feel, you can stub your toe but not feel it because your nerve endings have died. It predisposes you to a high risk of infections and injuries, because where there's bacteria, the blood's going to want to go and deliver your white blood cells to fight them off. But if your blood flow is not functioning properly due to the excess sugar, the white blood cells will not be able to get there on time. And so symptoms of this can include numbness or a tingling sensation in your feet, hypersensitivity to touch, or a burning sensation in your feet. And so as you can see from the image here, you have a man or a woman, but I believe it's a man with some sort of ulcer that's developed. And so I'm sure the reason for the size is because when it first developed, the man probably did not see or did not feel it. And so only discovered it when they finally went to go see a physician, and the physician most likely did a wellness check and saw that, hey, you've got a huge ulcer on your foot, on the sole of your foot. I wish you had told us earlier, so we could have maybe treated it to prevent a lot of this. And so some of the things that are recommended to do are to increase your vitamin B12 levels, your vitamin D levels. managing blood sugar, which is taking on a strategy that's going to better balance your blood sugar. Medication techniques. So there are medications, following a prescribed regimen. Certainly for those who like to cook or who want a more holistic approach, cayenne pepper can help in this regard. Acupuncture, which is known to stimulate immunity or your immune system. Now, before we get into the final part of this presentation, I just wanted to share something with you that I got from WebMD. This is a summary of some studies that they were observing and reviewing. And essentially it reads, if you've got diabetes, losing weight can get you off insulin and other medications. Create a safe diabetes weight loss plan with the help of experts. And as we can see, in one study, they found that diabetes improved glycemic and cardiovascular parameters in type 2 diabetic patients on a high nutrient density diet. Now, the key point here is high nutrient density diet, which means no McDonald's, reducing carbs, making sure you're getting a lot of green leafy vegetables, making sure you're getting a lot of nutrient dense foods. Okay, so fast food be gone, right? So, but essentially, to summarize, this is a retrospective case series looking at the potential efficacy of the high nutrient dense diet for participants who are compliant. Though further study is needed, the results were encouraging. And so the results showed that 62% of the participant became non-diabetic. That's an HbA1c, remember the A1c that I mentioned earlier, of less than 6%, a mean decrease of 2.35%, and a reduction in the mean number of drugs used from 4 to 1. So a high nutrient dense diet can go a long way into reducing your A1C, or rather improving your glycemic control. Now, another example was a little bit more specific, and I love sharing this story, and I'm sure there are countless other stories of people who have changed their diet, changed their lifestyles, and have seen positive results. But this particular one showed that a morbidly obese person, 338 pounds, a man who's had type 2 diabetes for over 20 years, he began to eat the Eat to Live 6-week program for weight loss. In the 7th week of the program, he had lost about 40 pounds, had stopped using insulin, and had an average glucometer reading of 97 and an A1C level of 5.8. He has renewed energy and feels great. Leg and foot pain that plagued them before are gone. So as you can see, a high nutrient, by the way, the Eat to Live 6-week program is a high nutrient dense program. It restricts certain things and it increases certain things. It restricts the bad and it increases the good. Okay, and of course there are other factors in there too, cutting out sodas, maybe supplementing, making sure you're getting all key nutrients. But there are 2 books that I like to share with regards to a nutritional approach on diabetes. The first one hits close to home because it pertains to diabetes within the African-American community. A lot of us in the Black American community have this idea that, well, it's so prevalent within our community because of genetics. But I love this book because what it does, it shows that the reason Asians, for example, as shown earlier, have a lower rate of diabetes compared to Blacks who have the highest rate of diabetes is not genetics, but it's cultural dietary choices. So the culture of foods that an Asian eats is not the same culture of foods that an African American eats. And so if those 2 were swapped, the results would follow. So if Asian Americans were to eat, were to adopt the cultural diet that belonged to African Americans, were to find themselves in the position of African Americans, and the African Americans were to swap with Asian Americans, and they swap food cultures and other factors, the African Americans would have the lowest diabetic rates, and the Asian Americans would have some of the highest diabetes rate. So I love that because it really takes the guilt away from our genetics and puts the responsibility squarely on the shoulders of the individuals. Another book written by the same author, Epigenetics, which takes a look at the relationship between the foods that we eat okay, and the genes that will manifest. And essentially, it shows that the expression of genes depend on the presence of nutrients, mainly minerals. And so it's the key quote of this book is The Death of the Genetic Theory of Disease Transmission. Now, what I love about both of these books is that they take the guilt off of excuse. They remove any sort of excuses to changing your life, and they put the responsibility squarely on what you are willing to do for yourself. How much of your cultures or inherited cultural dietary choices are you willing to sacrifice or change in order to improve your circumstances? So I love these books because of what they offer and what they do. Now, I briefly wanted to mention the third category of diabetes. Now, this is known as gestational diabetes. Now, what's interesting is pica is this describes this for many of the women in the audience who may have been pregnant before. You may have found that you have these weird cravings. You know, you crave maybe, so I've heard stories or women crave rust. You know, some women crave chalk. Some women crave ice cream. Some women actually crave mud. You know, they crave mud. And what pica is actually a sign of a nutritional deficiency. And so what is happening is this: as a woman is pregnant, she's having to share her nutrients with the fetal child. And so she's essentially eating for two. Now, a child is being developed in the 9 months of the fetal development. A child is developed much like a car. So you have, you know, the first trimester, you know, which has certain development stages, the second trimester, and lastly, the third trimester. And at each phase of development, the body, or in order to preserve the health and the proper development of the fetal child, will require certain minerals and certain nutrients. And so what's interesting is one way that the body will try to get the person to provide it the raw materials that it needs for the proper development of the child is through hunger symptoms or cravings known as pica. And so what happens in gestational diabetes is it's a situation where the pregnant mother, is at a greater risk of becoming diabetic, particularly because everything that she consumes, the body will take those nutrients and try to give them to the fetal child first. So it's very important for any woman who is currently pregnant to supplement. I might, I would encourage them, and I'm sure many doctors will put them on prenatal. I would encourage them to consider whole food, plant-based nutrients such as minerals and vitamins and probiotics, because these things will ensure that not only yourself, but your fetal child will receive the nutrients that it needs. And so that will hopefully reduce your risk of developing diabetes throughout the course of your pregnancy. But also something that I wanted to share is that the nutritional habits of parents can determine the risk of diabetes for not only themselves, but for their children. Here's what I mean by that. I wanted to share something, an illustration with you all that I believe does a great job of cementing this point. So I want to give you a scenario. Let's say you had a man and a woman, both of whom were obese, and they had a child who was also obese. So the husband, the wife, the mom, the dad are both obese, and they have a child who is also obese for his age. Now, many of us would take a look at the three of them and say, well, it's genetics. You know, mom is obese, dad is obese, so the son is obese. It's genetics. But what's interesting is what would happen if you were to take that obese child and put them in a home full of fitness, enthusiasts. You know, a couple that runs every morning, jogs, watches what they eat, goes to the gym frequently. Well, what would likely happen is that the obese child would lose a lot of weight and begin to look like the adoptive family. And so what we are seeing, and what we are saying, is that it is not the genetics that will always determine your health circumstances. It is your lifestyle. Because if you were to take a fit child and put him in a home of parents who essentially eat whatever they want, eat unhealthily, the fit child will begin to resemble the parent because of the food and dietary choices that the child is exposed to. And so just to give you an idea, you have a man and a woman and a child, okay? The paternal, P stands for paternal, GM, grandmother, GP is grandfather, M stands for maternal. So you have the man who is diabetic. Diabetes is denoted as the color blue. You have the paternal grandfather who married the paternal grandmother. The grandfather was diabetic. The grandmother was not. And so they gave birth to a son who was diabetic. Now, the mother, on the mother's side, her grandfather was diabetic, and her grandmother, and the grandmother was not diabetic. However, the woman that was given birth, the child that was birthed was a non-diabetic child. And so you have a diabetic man who ends up marrying a non-diabetic woman, and they bring forth a diabetic child. Again, the question that I put to you all is this: is the fact that the son became diabetic, is that a result of genetics, or is that a result of perhaps the food culture? So there's no right or wrong answer. There's an answer that I believe is correct, but I just want you all to think about it in light of me sharing some of the things that I've shared on the previous slide. We're almost done, folks. So I want to bring your attention to something called the glycemic index. I'm sure some of you are wondering, well, we know, Dr. Cedrick, we know about diabetes now. With Dr. Cedrick, we know about what's happening in the body and the pancreas and its role in insulin and the cells and everything, and we understand that. So what can we do? Well, I'd like to point you to something called the glycemic index. What this is it's a chart that tells you how quickly the body responds to different types of carbohydrates. So the glycemic index will give you a numerical value of how much sugar can be expected to be released in your body. So a higher glycemic index number signifies that that food product will release more sugar into your blood, okay, compared to a food product with a lower glycemic index. And so for anyone who is diabetic or even pre-diabetic or who just wants to reduce the risk of diabetes, the emphasis is to focus on consuming food products with low glycemic indexes. But you also have to understand that the glycemic index of a food product can change due to many factors. For example, if it's cooked, if it's been processed, or if it's ripe. So just to give you an illustration, a banana is green, but that same banana, if left alone, given a little bit of time, will become yellow. And the yellow banana has a greater glycemic index than a green banana, even though they're both the same banana, just different stages in the banana's life. The green banana is not so sweet. The yellow banana is very sweet. And if you let it get brown, you can make banana bread, which is really, really sweet. Okay, so high glycemic index foods will tend to raise blood sugar much quicker than low glycemic index food. So for anybody who is looking at better controlling their blood sugar, the emphasis is to have a diet full of high nutrients and low glycemic index foods. Now, sugar, it's everywhere. So for someone who is diabetic or someone who is trying to better control their sugar, what can you do? Well, I would encourage you first and foremost to focus on natural sources of sugar as opposed to table sugar, which is ubiquitous, meaning it's everywhere. Something like raw honey will generally contain enzymes, proteins, trace minerals, flavonoids, polyphenols, helps your antioxidant levels, lowers prostaglandin levels, which are responsible for inflammation, has bactericidal effects, has antiviral effect. And I would also encourage you to consume fruits. Whole fruits will generally have fiber, okay, which can also help slow down the absorption of sugar into the bloodstream and promote satiety. I would encourage you to consider stevia, which is recommended actually to many diabetics as a natural alternative, as a 0-calorie natural alternative, natural sweetener. Okay. What I would tend to also focus on is fibers, also known as sugar alcohols. Okay. These are low digestible carbs, such as fibers, starches. They're less sweet, and they can lower they have a low glycemic index. And again, they help with digestion. They can increase probiotics. They're mainly undigested. So we're talking Metamucil, Fiberlax. You can find fiber, different types of sugar alcohols and fibers at your local CVS, or your local ShopRite or Walmart. Okay. What I would encourage you to stay away from are artificial sweeteners such as Sweet and Low, Equal, Splenda, Truvia. These are heavily marketed as 0-calorie weight loss sweeteners, but studies actually show, okay, that they increase your risk of glucose intolerance, or let's just say diabetes and metabolic disease. So things like obesity, cholesterol levels, they increase those factors just as much as table sugar, which is what people are trying to get away from. And lastly, I would not recommend continuing to consume the same amount of table sugar, because that is linked to weight gain, reduced or poor working immune system, cancer growth, right? Because cancer cells love sugar. They love sugar. So if you can reduce your consumption of table sugar, that's wonderful. And table sugar is addictive. It promotes overeating. Perhaps even worse than table sugar, in my humble opinion, is something called high fructose corn syrup, because it has similar metabolic effects, or all of those bad things table sugar does, high fructose corn syrup does as well, with one extra kick to it. It's a genetically modified organism. So I would stay away from high fructose corn syrup personally. I know some people and certain industries out there, don't want to hear this because it might affect their bottom lines. But you're my audience, so while I have your attention, I will tell you to focus on things such as raw honey, fruits, and perhaps even stevia, and include fibers in your diet. So let's take a look at let's conclude essentially what we've discussed in terms of how to obtain a healthy lifestyle if you are a diabetic, or you are concerned about blood sugar. So the image to the right shows you a chart that says a low-calorie carbohydrate diet. What that means is a diet that's going to provide you more nutrients, or more nutrient density, than it is going to provide you in sugar. Remember, in America today, we get a 50%, up to 50% of our dietary source of energy from carbohydrates. We're always eating cookies, cakes, ice creams, pastas, rices. Whereas if you're someone struggling with blood sugar, the emphasis should really be on high nutrient dense foods and lowering your intake of table sugars, your intake of carbs. That is where the emphasis is. So keep in mind, please, that sugar can promote overeating because it's a very addictive substance. Okay, be mindful of the 0-calorie sweeteners such as Equal and all these other 0-calorie sweeteners that you find being promoted in these diet trends. Be mindful of them. They are not your friends. Okay, the only one I would recommend again is stevia, because it's naturally from plants, and doctors recommend that for many diabetics. So you can taste the sweetness a little bit, but it doesn't send your blood sugar high to the sky. But if you are diabetic, one thing I would encourage you to do, first and foremost, is to purchase a glucometer in order to track your blood sugar. I would consider a stevia as a 0-calorie sweetener, a natural option. I would encourage you to consume fibers. They have less toxicity. They promote good gut health. If you're someone who also has digestive issues, just in case, I would keep in mind, I would want you to know that sugar is a prime food for gut bacteria, and they use that to ferment gas. I would hope that you would understand that raw honey may be a very therapeutic option, that fibers are a good source to they can help improve the probiotic numbers in your stomach. Probiotics themselves can help with any digestive issues. And if anyone is just trying to spice up their blood sugar or their gut health, I would encourage you to consider consuming 1 or 2 teaspoonfuls of coconut oil, which is a medium chain triglyceride that can also be converted to usable energy. So it's also a source of energy in the body. So you don't have to fully rely on sugar energy. And try to eat food in their most raw form, because when you cook a food product, it denatures it a little bit. And so you're losing nutritional value. Like when you put broccoli in water and you boil it up and then you pour the water down the sink, well, that water contains a lot of bacteria, yes, because you have to wash it, but that water also contains a lot of nutrients that have been boiled out or steamed out of the broccoli or the food product. So wash your food products, but if you consume foods in their most raw form, you are getting all of the nutrients that's found in that food, but you're also going to fill up a lot quicker. It's very interesting. I realized I could not even eat 3 stalks of broccoli, raw broccoli, but I can eat several hamburgers. So, that goes to let you know that raw food, because of its nutrient density, will tend to fill you up a lot faster. And it's good for you too. It may not taste as good, but you can always season it a little bit. So just to really hammer home the point that I'm trying to make, okay, I wanted to give you an illustration of what, for many children in America today, this is what breakfast looks like, or this is what their day looks like. And so on the left, I have a glucometer, which is used to track your blood sugar levels. And we just put 70 to 120 as a normal range. On the bottom, again, there's that insulin valve. It really represents your pancreas and its ability to produce insulin. So I wanted to show you what happens when when a child wakes up in the morning, and why. Hopefully you'll see why so many people become diabetic later on in life. So in this particular example, we're not accusing anyone, but in this particular example, we see that, little Billy, for example, is 14 years old. He wakes up in the morning, his blood sugar is low, it's below 70, so he's hungry, right? Just like a car needs fuel, little Billy needs gasoline in the form of food or sugar energy. Now, what does he eat for breakfast? His parents give him a Lucky Charms, let's say, okay? Packed full of sugar, so it sends his sugar up. So he's got enough energy to put on his clothes and get on the bus. Then for lunch at 12, he eats a hamburger, and that sends his blood sugar up. And then he follows that up with a soda, okay, or a sugar sweetened beverage. And so it sends the blood sugar even higher. Now we're getting into dangerous territory, because remember, you want to maintain between 80 and 120. And then obviously he's going to want a snack. So he's going to eat a cookie, which is going to send his blood sugar way above in the red or danger zone. Okay, it's going to send his blood sugar above, what the 120 milligram per deciliter of blood sugar that we were trying to keep him under. Now, I want you to take a look at just the illustration on the bottom, the insulin valve. Okay, each time Billy eats, insulin is released. Each time he eats, insulin is released in order to remove the sugar from the blood and put it in the cells. And so what's happening is, by the time Billy leaves school at 3 o'clock, his insulin is running low, or it's completely out. Now he's going to go home. He's going to be hungry. He's going to eat a cake, or, eat a snack, and then eat dinner, and then maybe eat another snack. And so what's happening is, for years, our children are eating like this. And so at the end of the day, his pancreas is spent. There's not enough insulin anymore, or the insulin is not, there's not enough nutritional factors to use in order to build good working insulin. And so what happens is, over years, decades even, people become diabetic. However, what I hope we will consider is something a little like this. For our children, our grandchildren, our loved ones. In the morning, eat a protein-rich breakfast. For lunch, eat a a healthy lunch, you know, you can have meat and just include vegetables, because ultimately what we're talking about is you want a nutrient dense food. Okay, and so that's going to elevate the blood sugar, but also keep in mind that it's not elevating the blood sugar at the same slope or at the same extent as, you know, the Coca-Cola and the hamburger. Okay, and then let's say we were to drink water, you know, after a meal, for example, and as you can see, water adds no sugary input into the system, and so water is just going to, you know, remain balanced. It's going to balance things. It's going to help things work normally. And then for a snack, instead of a cookie, maybe give them an apple. Okay, apple is going to provide adequate sugar energy, and it also comes with fiber within the apple. Okay, and so what's happening is this: not only has he helped maintain his blood sugar, but he's also gotten fiber, which is also good for digestion and cleaning out the system. But take a look at the illustration on the bottom, representing the pancreas and representing insulin. Notice how each time Billy in this scenario eats, the amount of insulin that is being released is not as much as when he ate the Lucky Charms, or when he ate the hamburger, the Big Mac, or the pizza, or the cookie and soda. Okay, and so what happens is by the time he goes home, he's got a pancreas that's got plenty of insulin, plenty of ability to produce even more insulin, because what he's done in this scenario is that he's given himself the raw materials, the nutrients, the vitamins, especially the minerals, that are going to help the pancreas produce more insulin. And so this is the illustration that I want all of us to take home. And so how do you improve your insulin for those struggling with insulin? And by the way, we're almost done. We're pretty much done. But I just wanted to share this because usually people will often ask me, hey, what can I do? What can I take? So they'll ask, what can I do to improve my insulin? Well, it's really a lifestyle change. It's not just a one quick pill. However, just to give you all an idea to put you on the right path, I would include fiber in your diet. I would include digestive enzymes. I would drink and increase your consumption of water. I would consume lean and clean protein, such as eggs. Meat is fine. I would take your essential fatty acids. I would consume coconut, because coconut offers an alternative source of sugar. So coconut oil, for example, okay? Ketones is the alternative form of sugar or energy for the body. And I would consider a multi-mineral supplement. So something that was plant-based, ideally colloidal, liquid ideally, because it's more readily absorbed. And I would include antioxidants to kind of keep your blood remove free radicals from the bloodstream. So this is generally an illustration of what I would encourage people to do, because people will often ask me, what can I do? What can I do? These are some of the things you can do. Again, there's no quick pill. It's really a lifestyle change, but increasing certain things into your diet goes a long way. Now, if you've sat through this with us, I've got a very special treat for you. On my website, which is Dr. Seb, that's drced.com, I offer a free 7-step wellness program called the Genesis 7. And what this does is it's something interactive that you can do with friends, or you can do by yourself from the comfort of your own home. These are essentially 7 worksheets that you can print out and just kind of hang around your kitchen or hang around your office. And what they do is they have activities on them. And so the first one is going to try to modify your behavior. Essentially, all of them try to change your behaviors. You know, for example, the first one gives you a list of foods that you're going to try to go without. So you're going to number, for example, how many times you eat a certain food products in a day. And then the challenge is for the next day, you're going to try to reduce that. And then the day after that, you're going to try to reduce that. So essentially, it's behavioral modification. Okay, this program is absolutely free and you can go at your own pace. But my hope is that by developing this, those who attend my seminars, those who really, really want to somewhere to start, you know, a guide, they can take this and share it with their family, share it with their friends. I can make myself available if you've got questions, but this is something that I believe will help reduce inflammation, improve elimination, hydrate your body, balance and improve your metabolism, provide better nutrients to your system, stimulate your body, and also improve your stress management and rest or sleeping ability. So it's called the Genesis 7. Now, in conclusion, I want to share a quote with you, and it reads, it's by Thomas Edison, and it reads, "The doctor of the future will give no medicine, but will interest his and her patients in the care of the human frame, in a proper diet, and in the cause and prevention of disease." So through the course of this seminar, through the course of this PowerPoint presentation, my hope is that you have not seen me as Dr. Cedrick, the pharmacist, but a little bit more like the doctor of the future, because I'd like to think that I interested you in the care of your body and what's happening. I've interested you a little bit in nutrition and proper diet, and certainly in some of the root causes and ways in which we can prevent diabetes and better control our blood sugar. So with that being said, I'm Dr. Cedrick. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for attending this particular presentation. I'd like to thank those at the Tuckahoe Public Library, and I look forward to coming back with other topics. Thank you so much, and we can take questions from that.
Thank you, Dr. Cedrick. It was very clear and very good presentation. Now I understand more the ins and out of the diabetes. Thank you so much.
Excellent. I'm very happy. Thank you.
And I have an email question before the program. Anita sent me a questions. Is there a way to reduce A1C before it goes too high? My latest is 5.8.
Okay, that's a very good question. Now I'm going to go up, and I believe I'm still sharing my screen. So let me just go up to the A1C section. Okay, here it is. So is there a way to improve or reduce A1C? So first and foremost, I'd like to say 5.8, which she mentioned, would put her in the pre-diabetic or pre-diabetes category. So that's the one thing that I want to emphasize. She is considered to be pre-diabetic. And so what she has to do now are some of the things that was mentioned in the course of this seminar. So what we're talking about, and I want to share this story with you, where we touched upon how patients or those who took part in this case study with the high nutrient density diet were able to reduce their A1C by a mean average of 2.35%. And so what can she do? Well, I would encourage her to focus on the nutritional part. And so what that means is it's a two-pronged approach. You're going to want to reduce sugar, because sugar is the culprit in this. And sugar is not necessarily bad, because we have honey. Honey is wonderful for the body. Raw honey, ideally. Yeah, it's very wonderful for the body. And so we have sugar that, so she has to first change the type of sugar that she's consuming. Okay, maybe reduce table sugar, maybe look to see if she's consuming high fructose corn syrup. She's got to change that. And then she's going to have to then begin to swap it with honey and other forms of stevia, for example, which is a natural form of sugar. But she's also going to have to add certain things into her diet. She's also going to have to, and I hope you can still see my screen, she's also going to have to focus her diet around increasing the intake of water, okay? Adding fiber into her system, okay? Adding nutritional minerals into her system, food-based or plant-based nutrients, especially because I understand that eating healthy can be expensive, eating healthy can be time-consuming, and it's a challenge for a lot of people. And so for those people, and this is by no means a cheat sheet, but for those people, sometimes they have to supplement their diet because they're not getting enough nutrients from the diets that they currently have. So if you're one of those people who finds that you have to supplement you're not getting enough from the foods that you have, but you don't have enough to, let's say, go to Whole Foods and buy organic foods and all these fruits and vegetables, then it may be time to invest in a food-based or plant-based multi-mineral or multivitamin. It's kind of like a stopgap into you making the lifestyle changes. But diabetes is a vascular disease, so I would encourage her to focus on reducing sugar intake, changing the type of sugar or sweetness that you're getting, focusing heavily on water and water consumption, adding fiber into your diet, okay, minerals, colloidal minerals, food-based products such as antioxidants and digestive enzymes, probiotics. So that's where I would focus. But most importantly, she can get a jump start with the Genesis 7 program. That's going to really change her behavior, as many of you who will do this program will see. Good question. I hope I've answered it.
Anita, does Dr. Cedrick answer your question? Yeah, I think she's there, but I don't know. Okay, the next two comment. Thank you, Dr. Cedrick, for an excellent presentation. I will go to your website now. And the other patron also say very informative, clear, and actionable. I too will go to your website. Thanks for sharing your knowledge. And the last one is from Adriana. Does intermittent fasting have a positive effect on blood sugar in the short or long term? Fasting such as eating for 8 hours and fasting for 16 hours each day.
Okay, that's a very good question. I do want to clarify that by no means am I an expert on fasting, but I do know this. Fasting, I'm not sure how often we should fast is, you know, I know there are people who fast pretty frequently. I'm not sure that from the best of my knowledge, I'm not sure that that's a good idea, but I think fasting overall is a good thing, because what fasting does is it contributes to your ability to self-control. It allows your body time, for example, for the insulin that's been released to remove any blood that's in any sugar that's in your bloodstream. So fasting has many health benefits. As a matter of fact, with a lot of these tests that we mentioned, the A1C, the fasting blood glucose, well, it's in the name, fasting. So it gives you a great picture of where your body's ability or your pancreas's function stands, because you're giving your body time, and then you're assessing its ability to have removed all the sugar from the bloodstream. So fasting is a tool that can be used to help you identify where you stand in terms of blood sugar. Fasting can help you with regards to self-control. And I think ultimately, if you can fast, not only are you giving your body a break and the ability to sort of cleanse itself and get rid of some of the funk and the gunk that's in the body, but I think if you can fast, right, if you can resist the temptation of cookies and cakes, then I think you can make the lifestyle changes. If junk food is your vice, then you can certainly make the switch over to nutrient-dense food. So fasting ultimately is a great tool. I'm not sure to what extent or more how specific fasting, the specific impact intermittent fasting would have. But I know generally fasting is a wonderful tool for the body for more reasons than just health.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Cedrick. And the other?
Thank you for the question.
And the next question is, what liquid supplements do you recommend? And how does, sorry, I skipped one question. The first question would be, how does coconut oil help? Do you take a spoon of it? And the next question is, what liquid supplements do you recommend?
Okay, so those are great questions. How does coconut oil help? So one of the reasons I love coconut oil, by the way, if you were to go to your grocery store, and if you were to purchase coconut oil, for example, it would appear as a solid at room temperature. So it's a lot like candle wax, right? The idea is not to scrape off the flakes and eat it. The idea is to maybe get a spoonful in a small cup, microwave it for 20 seconds. What happens is when it's exposed to that heat, just even a little bit, it actually melts. It turns into a liquid, all right? Coconut oil is packed full of nutrients. And one in particular that I like to mention is something called ketones. Ketones will often act as an alternative source of energy for your cells, your brain cells, your cells throughout your body. And so it's giving your body a break from table sugar and giving it ketones, okay, which is another form of fuel for the body. So, these are just nutrients that I love, and I think people should look into them. I personally use them, and I think I'd like to believe that they've helped me have the health and maintain the health that I have. I'm a big proponent of these things, but of course, I would ask anybody to speak with their doctors, look into these things themselves. These are just suggestions, things that have shown benefit in terms of overall health, in terms of the overall health of the body. This is by no means the only list, but this is just something that I found myself answering repeatedly. So I thought, you know what, I'm just going to get ahead of this thing and include these things as far as, what people can start looking into and maybe having a conversation with their health professionals. And I'm sorry, what was the second question?
What liquid supplements do you recommend?
Okay, great question. Now, I don't work for them, but there is a company that I love, and they are based here in New York. They get a lot of my business. So, but they're called Piping Rock. And Piping Rock is a company that they have one particular product that I love. It's called the Colloidal Minerals. Okay. If you have a chance, if you're trying to start supplementing, maybe you don't take minerals, look into Colloidal Minerals. But I will say this, one of the reasons I use them, that particular product, is because number one, it's liquid. When you take tablets, more often than not, the body does not absorb 100%. Many times the body will absorb, between 20 and 50% of the tablet, and the rest gets excreted out, depending on, your age, or depending on the strength of your stomach acid. So I tend to shy away from tablets, and I prefer my nutritional supplements in liquid form. And so this particular product is called Colloidal Minerals from pipingrock.com. And colloidal alludes to the size. It's small enough to enter your cells. It's plant-based. And I truly believe if there's one thing we as Americans and people around the world, we have overemphasized the roles of vitamins. And I think they're useful, but we have neglected something I believe is probably just as important, if not more. And that is minerals. And I'm talking plant-based minerals. And so that's a product that I love. Another company that I personally use, I'm sure there are other ones out there. You have Garden of Life, okay? You have Buy Food Research or Food Research brand. So these tend to be whole food-based supplements, okay? These are not, your usual synthetic, products that you find at your store. So a lot of these you may find at specific vitamin stores or even online, but I tend to focus on food-based products. I'm not knocking some of the other products, but for me, from the research that I've done for myself and the things that I want for my health and my loved ones, I am a proponent of food-based and plant-based, ideally in liquid form, because the body can just absorb it, and minerals.
Okay. So the last question is, I had heart surgery last year, and I'm also a type 1 diabetes since 1989. I'm
Wow.
very tired and lack energy. Any suggestions? And the comment is, thank you for an excellent presentation.
First and foremost, thank you so much for that comment. All of your compliments have really meant a lot. And it really just encourages me to continue with this and to continue to reach out to other venues and other libraries and organizations, because when I hear that I've made, I haven't wasted your time, and that you've taken something from this, I sleep very well. It's one thing to hear it from my wife, who's obviously a huge supporter and encourages me to do this. It's one thing to hear from her, but of course she's my wife, so she's a little biased, if you know what I mean. She so I don't know how much I should trust her compliments, but it's always more meaningful to hear it from those I've never met. I've just met for the first time. And their experiences with this. So it is humbling, and I'm very thankful that I was able to serve you all tonight, something that's going to pertain to your life and improve your lives. But I just wanted to say that before I forgot, and I got emotional and I started crying or anything like that. But please repeat her question again, please.
Okay. It's from John Larkins. I had heart surgery last year, and I'm also a type 1 diabetes since 1989. I'm
Okay.
tired and lack of energy. Any suggestions?
Okay, great question. So she's had surgery. She's been a type 1 diabetic since the 80s, and she's struggling with fatigue. Am I right?
Yeah, it's a he, actually.
Excuse me. I'm sorry. And he's struggling with fatigue. Okay, so one of the things that I want to emphasize when dealing with fatigue is this. So fatigue is a result of the sugar that comes from the food that we consume not entering the cells. And so that's what's happening with regards to fatigue. And so the solution is to make sure that, number one, that you eat well. Number two, when you eat and the food that you consume releases sugar, it is now crucial and imperative for you to then have that insulin there so that it can take the sugar and put the sugar inside of the cells. Now, the challenge with someone who is type 1 diabetic is that their pancreas is not working. But the solution for that same type 1 diabetic is insulin. And so it's about making sure that with your endocrinologist, who's the diabetes doctor, as you can say, is to make sure that they have you on insulin, and they have you on the right amount of insulin, the right dose, right? It's to make sure that you've met with a dietitian or even a nutritionist, and that they've helped you portion out your food, because you have to know how much insulin to give regarding the food, the amount of food that you've consumed. For example, if you consume 2 bowls of food compared to a small bowl of food, those two do not require the same amount of insulin. So that has to be known, and that can only be known by talking with your endocrinologist, again, the diabetes doctors, they can often call them, and speaking with a dietitian and sort of getting at getting an idea of how you should portion out your meals, which meals you should, which meals or which nutrient dense food products you should consume. Okay, and so those things are very important. I'm just reminded of something, a book called Death to Diabetes, written by someone from my hometown, actually, called Dwayne McCullough. I've read this book and it was wonderful. I think you can get it on Amazon, or his website is called Death to Diabetes. Very straight to the point. But one of the things that he did when he was diagnosed with diabetes was he began to eat certain foods and immediately test his blood sugar. So he wanted to detail which foods would send his blood sugar up and which foods would keep his blood sugar relatively normal or good levels. And so You don't have to go through all of that by yourself, but he did because he dealt with his diabetes years ago. But today you have something called a glycemic index, for example. This illustration, for example, you have that, which is something that you can obviously download or print. You can obviously post it up, and certainly with this glycemic index, you can use it as a guide into selecting foods that have a low glycemic index at high nutrient density. And so these things will go a long way into making sure that when you eat food, okay, the right amount of insulin that you're injecting into yourself will then take that food and put them into your cells, which will fix the energy situation. Okay. Now, as far as, having the surgery, what that does, I think, it puts you at a risk. I think you've also got to focus on, I know exercising is great, but you also have to give yourself and your body time to heal. So that's really all I can say with regards to, the surgery. I'm not sure that it pertains to this a whole lot, unless, maybe they're giving you, let's say, steroids, which will increase the amount of blood sugar in your bloodstream, but I don't think that's the case in this particular example. So in conclusion, I know that was a little long-winded, please excuse me, but in conclusion, talk with your endocrinologist and really sort of refine how much insulin that you ought to be taking. Speak with a dietitian or a nutritionist so you can get a better idea of the glycemic index and focus on those foods with a low glycemic index but high nutrient density. Maybe you don't want to eat a whole plate at once. Maybe you want to eat small bowls or in smaller increments throughout the day. But those, and certainly I would, I would take, trace minerals, just because a lot of our food, is denatured. It's the way it's grown. There's a lot of things going on there. So you want to make sure that whatever nutrients that you're not able to get from your food, that at least you're able to get it from an external source. So I would strongly encourage you to consider those steps. And a great question, and I hope that helped. I really do.
Okay, so anyone else have any questions?